If you could summarize the World Heritage Program in 60 seconds, what would you say to Ohioans who don't know anything about the program?
If you want to understand who we are, why we are, from where we came from, then all you have to do is look at the sites, the 1,007 sites that are currently on the UNESCO World Heritage List. These are the waypoints of history. These are the places that are touchstones, mileposts. When we want to understand why things happen, sometimes it's important to look behind us to realize what the circumstances are that we exist in today, and perhaps to see what the future is going to be like. And the Hopewell sites are potentially part of that pantheon of great historical heritage.
What is the role of UNESCO?
That's probably a much larger question than World Heritage. Mm-hmm. But UNESCO is the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. And I think what makes UNESCO particularly important to Americans is that at its genesis, Americans were integral, important facilitators, contributors to the origins of UNESCO. Essentially, Americans are in UNESCO's DNA. When the first meetings were happening to kind of crystallize this idea of an organization post-World War II that would be instrumental in sharing knowledge throughout the world on the premise that by doing so, what we create are the defenses against war in the minds of men and women. That delegation that came from the United States was the largest of any country. We had over 40 people, and they were the greatest academics and scientists and policymakers of that time in the mid-1940s. And so UNESCO is an organization that basically is committed to peace, and it strives for peace by ensuring that there's education, that scientific research is facilitated and its results are shared, that cultural heritage is respected and revered, and is seen as a place in which we all come together and we all see ourselves in it. Through freedom of expression, which is one of the main objectives that UNESCO has in fighting for the flow of information, the possibility that one person can share it and another person can receive it. These are a lot of the elements that make UNESCO, but the key here is that the focus is always on peace.
There are more than 1,000 World Heritage sites around the world, but less than 24 in the US. Why is that?
It's probably due to a very committed process of ensuring that we nominate sites that really do fit the criteria for World Heritage. The other probably also has to do with the fact that in 1984, Ronald Reagan had pulled the United States out of UNESCO. What's important to note, however, is that he did remain a part of the organization in the World Heritage Center, the World Heritage process, in the International Hydrological Program, and the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Program. He stayed a part of these three because he thought they were important. And half of the sites that you mentioned, the 22 that we have today, were all inscribed during the Reagan administration. But I think what happened was that over time, we lost track of the fact that because we were not members of the big UNESCO, that there was this idea that we weren't really participating. I think that now that we're back, we see the value and importance of this program, because it is a wonderful opportunity for us to share the great world heritage that exists in the United States, with the rest of the world.
From what you've seen of the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks nomination, what do you think is the most compelling part of it?
What struck me when I first came to Ohio last year for my initial visits to the sites was their beauty, and something that really spoke to me on a very visceral level what these ancient peoples were able to do with the resources that were available to them, the capacity that they had to be able to see far beyond the treetops, is really quite extraordinary. So what these places represent to us are not just these sculpted earthworks, but they actually speak to us in terms of science, in terms of a spirituality in many ways, because they reached far beyond where their feet were planted and saw in the stars something that was remarkable and tried to understand and comprehend it. That, to me, is a compelling story. Now, it's not up to me to decide, but I think it is a compelling story, and these sites are on the tentative list, which means that the United States has already seen their value and thinks that they can be competitive in a global process, which is the evaluation of sites by the World Heritage Committee.
What obstacles does Ohio face in getting these sites on the World Heritage List?
Well, what it means is that there's still a process, and that is that the United States government is responsible for controlling the procedure as it relates to UNESCO and the World Heritage process itself. And so what the government needs to do is, at the appropriate time, make a decision as to which sites move forward from the tentative list. And the United States is different in some ways than other countries. Some countries will nominate more than one site. Although we have 3 sites in Ohio, they're coming under one nomination. So that nomination then goes to the World Heritage Committee. It's referred for evaluation to the World Heritage Center. And then there is also an outside evaluator who would come and look at the sites and see that they live up to what the application has said and the nominating documents, and then make a recommendation to the World Heritage Committee. And so that's kind of a compressed explanation. The whole process can take 2 to 3 years. Usually it's a three-year process, because you go from tentative list to nomination, and the nomination is usually made a year or so out, 18 months out. Then the community that is responsible, in this case the Ohio History Connection, the National Park Service, working together, would then proceed to build that document, which is an extraordinary undertaking. I've seen these World Heritage applications, and they are a fantastic resource in many ways about the site. They're quite extraordinary in terms of the compilation of pages, but they're also very powerful in the narrative that they want to put forward. So it's the design, it's the facts, it's the location, the boundaries, and the story. And that story must be very compelling. And it's a story about why this site is of outstanding universal value to humanity, which is contained within the World Heritage Convention. It is the treaty document that governs this process.
There are larger politics at play with regards to the U.S. and UNESCO. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So what we have right now is a situation where the United States is still a member of UNESCO, but in 2011, it stopped paying its dues to UNESCO. When the governments of the world, who are the representatives on the member states of UNESCO, in our general conference, which is a meeting that happens every 2 years, voted to admit Palestine with full membership rights. Now, what this triggered was a law that was written in about 1990. And that law was a very specific, very direct law, which said that the United States would stop funding any international organization to which it was a member if that organization admitted the Palestinians with full membership rights. So this drags us into the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, which have been going on for many, many years. The reality is that since 2011, nothing has changed in terms of the ongoing negotiations between Israel and Palestine. The Palestinians joining UNESCO did not in any way alter the ground in terms of those negotiations. What it has done, however, it has impacted negatively upon UNESCO. The United States, by its sheer size and wealth and the strength of its economy, through a formula that all the member states have agreed to, was the largest contributor to UNESCO, contributing 22% of our budget. The result of losing 22% of your budget in an instant is really quite devastating. And it happened immediately. So from 2011 until today, we have operated on a smaller budget when the demands on the organization have increased exponentially. If we just take a look at the attacks on cultural heritage in Iraq and Syria, places that are also on the World Heritage List, like Hatra and the Aleppo Bazaar, these are sites that have been devastated by war and conflict, that have been drawn into an extremist ideology which seeks to destroy history, to destroy our collective identity, so that they can rewrite it in a way that extols their agenda of hatred, of intolerance, and brutality. This is not the world that we want. And UNESCO is the organization that is fighting this war crime that has been committed against people and the places that are significant in their lives. So we need to have the United States back. We need to overcome this unfortunate situation that has existed now since 2011. And what that requires is that the Congress needs to give the president what's called a waiver of that law. And by doing so, then the president could restore funding. And we can begin with a waiver for the World Heritage Program, which is one that is of real interest right now here in Ohio. But the rest of the organization has incredible value to all the people of the Buckeye State. But we're focusing on World Heritage, and we can start there. And I would encourage people from Ohio, the citizens of this community, to look to that process of what is unique in our country, of speaking our opinions to those that make policy, of saying we have a lot at stake here. And if we are not contributing to this process, we put ourselves at a deficit in terms of moving forward with our very, very important contribution to the World Heritage List. We want to be a part of this. We want to be the first sites in Ohio. And there's another element to this that's very important, and that is the economic value that these sites can provide to local communities. World Heritage is a sustainable driver of economic advantage, growth and development in communities around the world, including in the United States. At Cahokia Mounds in southeastern Illinois, the World Heritage Site, nominated in 1984. At that time, 30,000 visitors a year. Today, 300 to 400,000 visitors a year. A year and a half ago, they celebrated in the summer of 2013 their 10 millionth visitor. That's transformative. That is a driver for jobs, for economic activity, for money that comes into the community and helps build that community. This is not something that we should shy away from. We should embrace this because this matters to the people of the community. There are bigger geopolitical forces that are at play, but we have to fight for what is ours. And ours is an opportunity to transform our communities, build them around something that we cherish, that we care for, and turn that into something that also then gives something back to us. This is a gift that comes from 2,000 years ago. Imagine Imagine, these ancient Indians, 2,000 years ago, created these sites, and we are the inheritors of that. And like a great inheritance, we can build on it and make something good, not only for our communities in terms of economic development and jobs, not only for the prestige, but then we can also give it to the rest of the world. That's remarkable. That's something that we should embrace. And we control that process. It's a decision that Americans can make. And they can make it in favor of doing something for themselves and as a gift to the rest of the world.
Well, I think you covered the rest of my questions. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Well, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. A pleasure speaking with you as well.